What does the NFL have wrong about Drake Maye? That and more this week on the couch. It's RSP week. Matt Waldman, what does the NFL have wrong about Drake Maye?
They don't wear funky hats like we do, so that's probably part of it. I think what they have wrong about Drake Maye is kind of what they prefer over guys like Patrick Mahomes, because when you look back at Patrick Mahomes was not the robo quarterback, and the NFL's they're looking just like people look at models, and they're looking for the safe decision based on the models, because the models get things more correct than not. That's at least the intent of the model. The NFL's model for quarterbacks is high completion percentage, big name program, big frame, big arm, big production at a big time program. And so all those things are resume bullet points that they can lean on. So if the processing doesn't work out, if the ability to manage the pocket doesn't work out, if the actual charted accuracy of whether they're pinpoint or not, which you can't see from completion percentage, hence Baker Mayfield early in his career, they can point and say, listen, he had all these things. Even Bill Parcells' little formula of 62%, he had all these things. It's okay. Sometimes you make mistakes. The league is tough. He just didn't have the intangible things that we can't deal with yet, as opposed to saying drafting Brock Purdy in the second round, who didn't have a lot of those things, and it goes wrong. Everybody goes, fire these incompetent boots, Right. And that's so really what Drake Maye has is all the tangible, the seemingly tangible tools. But the problem is they all know, CJ Stroud, that processing is very important, and they don't know how to define that yet at the highest level. And part of it is actually just charting plays and defining what accuracy really is beyond a number, contextualizing it a little bit better so that the number has more context to it. Right now, any pass that's caught is accurate under accuracy percentage. Baker Mayfield had an ungodly accuracy percentage. His man coverage accuracy percentage against tight man didn't project well, and Odell Beckham and his daddy could tell you that very clearly. So it's one of those scenarios where Drake Maye could be good. He has a lot of traits to develop to being good, but the NFL, because the margin for error for all the things I talked about, pocket movement, pocket management, game management in the red zone and the black zone, and pass placement and really processing and getting the ball out exactly when it needs to be out as soon to anticipate the tight coverage. Because we know in college, one step open by a receiver, a lot of college quarterbacks think that's covered. Whereas in the NFL, a half a shoulder open is open. And so if you're having to think about that and compile the data, you're hit, you're sacked, or you should have thrown the ball away. And when you throw in all the things that we talk about all the time, like moving to a new city, becoming an adult with a ton of money, having notoriety, having to learn a more difficult playbook, having all these things. Oh, and more complex defenses, savvier, faster, everything's small margin of error. You're going to think about things that you just learned and got better at, and they're probably going to regress because you're thinking. So the things that you even were good at on tape no longer look that good temporarily. And they go, see, I remember that one play where I saw Anthony Richardson throw that ball into cover 2. See, he always does that. And you're like, no, he did that once, and he had one bad, he has one bad week, and then you watch the rest of it and you go, oh, he didn't look like that before. And you're like, well, maybe he did. Maybe I just didn't know what I'm looking at. And that's the tough part for the NFL is they hope we'll throw Drake Maye in there, and we hope that he'll gain enough experience to develop the processing and pocket management and game management, and he'll figure it out. And all the other things that we modeled make us look okay when that stuff happens.
Yeah, I like how you led with that, because when you say tangible, the way I would put it is it's defensible. Taking Drake Maye in NFL circles, it's defensible. And one of the things I remember, we've both been doing this for a long time now, people would say to us back when the draft prep analysis industry wasn't an industry, it was just a little cottage thing, a little hobby. Well, your job's not on the line. Your job's not on the line if you're wrong. But that's not a good bias. That's a bad bias. That actually skews towards these defensible, tangible, conventional analysis, conventional grading of these players, like you said, so that if it goes wrong, you say, well, he checked all the boxes. I mean, anybody would have made that decision. I think you could look back at the trade that the Jets just made with the Eagles, and somebody analyzed this really well, because it's one GM with job security and one GM that doesn't have job security. So when you look at, the Eagles could basically sign Bryce Huff for 3 years and get a future second or third round pick for 1 year for Son Reddick, because the event horizon for Joe Douglas is just 1 year. And Howie Roseman probably factored that in. So it's not a good bias whenever you feel like your job is on the line with these calls that you make. And like you said, what I think it's really neat about the way you do this, it feels like you're solving, especially with quarterbacks, because it's such a mental position. You're solving for X. And Matt, I almost feel like after you've watched these quarterbacks, you can simulate, like in a Being John Malkovich kind of way, if people even remember that film, what it's like to be them, where you're not actually having the thoughts and making the decisions, but you can just sit there and feel what it's like and solve for X. Like, why emotionally, spiritually, from a football X's and O standpoint, is he doing this? And then, like you said, that leap where there's so many things across that great emotional divide that you have to deal with. How's this going to hold up? You mentioned CJ Stroud really quickly and processing. Just reflecting on Stroud, were you shocked? Did you see in his range of outcomes that kind of success in his first year?
No, not with the Texans. No, not remotely, because I thought, okay, Nico Collins is a pretty good receiver, but maybe not necessarily a top tier guy. Tank Dell's intriguing. Robert Woods is an old veteran hoping to provide a little coaching and maybe a little work on the field. And then looking at running game, it looked kind of patchwork. The line play, we weren't sure about how that was going to go. So the fact that he played as well as he did, that's not an outcome that I would project. I would project that he was going to survive the year, and then we would go, all right, success. There was some promising things. Yes, that they weren't going to burn the stake, and that's the thing with all this is I love the things that you mentioned about, that it's a cover your assets business, because we've learned since the way back in the days when we were the skateboarders skating in the pool, and it was like there were no X Games and there were nothing, and Tony Hawk was just some cult figure, right? We were doing the equivalent of that way back then. And when people said that, that's fine. But now we know scouts. Now we know people who've been in the league, and they go, yeah, everyone gives the 4th round grade to cover their behinds when they're either higher on a guy than other people are, or they're lower on a guy than other people are. Just like people get 3s on employee evaluations in corporate America. It's like, it's safe. It's a safe grade I can give. It's not going to hurt me.
Yeah, I wish I could pull Russ Landy in here for a second. He could tell a story or two about how this still pervades the NFL, and it does make teams make bad decisions. Now, on the flip side, and again, folks, mattwaldman.com, RSP is out. It's going to be your best friend for a long time, including the post-draft. In the post-draft, RSP is super essential. And if you read the RSP, it foreshadows the post-draft RSP, because you give ideas about good fits, good roles, and things like that. So, but on the flip side, spoiler alert, where you might be lower than the consensus on Drake Maye, you're higher than the consensus on Michael Penix. So again, in that when you're being, instead of being John Malkovich, being Michael Penix, when you were Michael Penix, watching his tape over the course of his career, what did you experience that makes you confident in him?
I mean, one, pressure is, I joked about this recently, is that pressure is like that awful roommate that you have who just wrecks everything you really don't want to deal with. And quarterbacks
Doesn't pay the bill. Yeah.
doesn't pay the bill, eats all your food,
Right.
throws wild parties, and and does things in front of your family when they come and visit that just embarrass you. Most quarterbacks, they deal with pressure that up close and personal. It can ruin their experience. And I feel like after watching Michael Penix both at Washington and at Indiana, he kind of coexisted with pressure as if like they were able to like work out a set of days. And even when pressure broke the rules, he seemed to find solutions that kind of stifled pressure and didn't make the big mistakes that pressure wanted him to do. He was kind of unflappable, because if you look at the data, he didn't throw a lot of interceptions at Indiana when he was wearing pressure like a second skin, essentially. And so that was really telling. But what was more telling is that he was better in the middle of the field than I thought he got credit for. He climbs the pocket well. And to me, Drake Maye drifts in the pocket. He invites pressure where he steps outside, basically gets rid of the advantageous leverage that the tackles had. And now he's created an urgency that he didn't need to create because he wouldn't climb. Now he can climb, but he doesn't do it enough. His first reaction is to turn and bolt or turn around and run. Michael Penix will climb and find the option. And that's something that is very important at the NFL level. I mean, Brock Purdy does that, and he doesn't have Penix's arm, downfield accuracy, or athletic ability, frankly.
Right.
So, yeah, it's the ACLs are worrisome. The shoulder injuries were worrisome to an extent. But I always hear people point to certain games. Like last year, it was CJ Stroud versus Georgia, and that was a narrative telling thing, and I remember watching that game and going, CJ Stroud was good either way. Like the things that he was not that much more of a runner versus Georgia than the way I saw, at least from my opinion. I was like, he can move outside the pocket. Are you asking him to be anything more than a guy who can move and throw? Or are you asking him to be Jalen Hurts? And I don't think anybody, the way people made it, it almost sounded like they're saying he can really run. He might be, they weren't saying Hurts, but the way they portrayed it, it sounded like they're making him out to be a running quarterback. Whereas with Penix, I remember hearing, I have some colleagues that I respect a lot, and they were kind of like, well, he looked exposed in that Michigan game. And then I went and watched the Michigan game, and I had already charted the Texas game, and I was like, there wasn't that much of a difference for the things that I look at that seemed to matter for me, where I was like, it was like the anti-Stroud narrative that he was wrecked in that game. And I'm like, nah, he really wasn't. So, looking at him, he's the safest quarterback this class. We know who that is. And he's almost childproof, but the kids are going to get a chance to take a shot at them. Those kids up in Chicago, and we'll see if they overdose him on some things that they shouldn't. But the next one on my list, I think that Penix, I would love to see the Vikings get Michael Penix. I don't think they're going to do it because Sam Darnold looks like a Drake Maye model. If you like in terms of archetype, not necessarily ability, but if somehow he lands on a team like that and can sit for 6 to 8 games, I'd like to see him wait longer because you know how I am about quarterbacks, but I think he could manage it better than just about any other quarterback.
Yeah, there's something to adversity. I know when you and I have talked over the years about players, I want to start. Show me the worst game That's where you're going to learn the most. And that's honestly where you're going to see how they're going to respond to a lot of the things they're going to face. Josh Allen's a great example of that. I was won over by Josh Allen in some of his worst games, like Nebraska and Iowa, some of these terrible games statistically, but you had an idea of what he could bring to bear when it was time for the fight. So yeah, so much there in these quarterbacks. And, we don't want to get too hung up on the order they go off the board or where they go in the draft, because there's so few teams that are going to invest a high pick in a quarterback, that whether a quarterback in this class, especially whether a quarterback goes third or fourth or falls all the way out of the first round, might just be based on what one team thinks of that quarterback. You mentioned Minnesota, whether Michael Penix goes fourth overall, and he's not going to go fourth overall, or falls into the second round, could most just be based on what one team thinks, but that's the NFL for you.
Would it have changed? Would it have changed if Lamar Jackson, if the Ravens didn't trade back into the first round at the very last pick,
sure,
and he was a second round pick, would be looking at a 2-time MVP and going, see, right. That's the thing. There's certainly models are important for the safe thing, but there's nothing safe about quarterbacks.
No.
So, the NFL hasn't figured out how to develop them or how to pick them. So you can spare me the model right now, right? Because if they haven't figured out, the model hasn't figured it out.
Yeah. And it may well be, again, it's one of those things. And again, I tell people at least once or twice a year to read the piece you wrote. Jeez, man, it was like 12 or 13 years ago now, The Great Emotional Divide. Because I think it's something that everybody, I don't care if you play fantasy football, whatever, should understand about the NFL, is that it's a mental, emotional, spiritual, physical crucible that no player can understand until they're in it. No, go ahead.
And I would recommend too, decision making is intuitive at the RSP, because what the NFL gets wrong about quarterbacking more than anything is that they're trying to look at things about quarterbacking from an academic decision-making matrix when it's actually an improvisational performance matrix. The quarterbacking is more like stand-up comedy or improvisational music, where you have the known theory, you have technique, you have structure, but you also have to take all those things and integrate it into something that you haven't done before, off structure, instantaneously. And that instantaneous accuracy that you can do riffing as a jokester is important. And I've joked today, you'll like this, is that quarterbacks, like stand-up comedians, Alex Smith would be the guy who had great material written for him. Maybe he even wrote great material, intellectual, brainy, lots of great references, but he had no timing to deliver a joke, and most of it fell flat. Whereas Brett Favre had nothing but fart jokes. Nothing but fart jokes.
Yeah.
But he had such great timing that even when he bombed on 2, he hit so good on the other 4 that everyone remembers the other 4, except for the people that hate Brett Favre, and then they remember the 2 that he missed.
Yeah. Alex Smith needs a laugh track to be funny. Okay. I want to ask you a bunch of kind of personality kind of questions.
Right.
I mean, when I say personality, what I mean is, because I always talk about simulating. I mean, I know you go into the bunker and you spend, I guess, probably thousands of hours each year watching these guys. Right. I think if I do the math real fast in my head, I'm sure that you spend at the very least close to 1,000 hours, if not well over 1,000 hours. So you spend a lot of time with these guys. You spend a lot of time with these players, and I'm sure things just happen spontaneously. So I'm going to ask you these questions and see who pops into your head. First, I know that every year you go into this as a tabula rasa. One of the things I think that is real admirable, and I said this in a way I remember that made you say, well, I mean, I do actually care what people think. I said, you just don't even care what people think, but you don't process it. Again, it's the opposite of is this defensible? Is this take defensible? Well, I don't even know what the other takes are. So I don't even know if it's defensible. It's just, you asked me to do this process, and this is the outcome that I came up with. So you kind of know some of these players from the chatter about them. You probably have seen some of them on the tape of other players that you've watched for previous RSPs, but you're kind of going in fresh. So first of all, even though you don't have that much expectations, out of the 2024 class, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, the whole shebang, who surprised you? Who, when you watched them, you said, "Whoa, okay, I had an idea," or even when I first started to watch this player, I thought I was watching this, and now I understand something completely different than what I thought.
Yeah. Or let's see, if it was like they belied my expectation from whatever expectation I had.
Sure. Or just just otherwise while you're watching them, you were surprised, you were gripped by, oh, okay, I thought thought the story was this, but now I see the story is something different.
Okay. Good question. I would probably say, can I give you a few?
Sure, yeah, obviously.
Okay. All right. There's a guy, I just kept making the mistake thinking that he was draft eligible for the past 3 years. And I kept listing him for the past 3 years, and he's a running back out of Boise State by the name of George Holani. And each year that I watched him, he got a little bit better. So this year I watched him and I was like, oh, he's kind of like a Jeff Wilson type of running back. Like, this guy has grown. He's a good mover. He's got good contact balance. He's 5'10", 208, catches the ball well. And he's pretty fast. I mean, 4.52 ain't bad for a 5'10", 208-pound running back who you're just expecting to maybe contribute on special teams and maybe grow from there. So he kind of surprised me with actually how quick he was and how good he was at making people miss and running through contact. So that was one that kind of surprised me. Staying on that one, Braylon Allen, I heard so much about him, and I felt like he was the guy where you ate the sandwich and somebody said, "What did you think of that?" And I said, "Well, the sandwich tastes like turds, but that lettuce sure was good." And then you have well, let me make you another one. And then you make the other one and you're
Same
like,
sandwich.
well, it's different. It still tastes bad, but now the tomato was good.
Oh.
So like every play, if you took 10 sandwiches, and his game was so fragmented that you could make a really good sandwich out of all the bad ones, with all the good pieces that were in it, but he rarely integrated it at a level that I was thinking. I never heard of Kamani Vidal or Dylan Johnson, but I love those two guys.
Yeah.
Kamani Vidal is, a couple years ago, everyone was high on DeAndre Swift, especially in fantasy, and they saw him as a running back one. I think now we've kind of figured out that DeAndre Swift is a good NFL running back who can give good fantasy production in the right environment, but he's a limited running back. I think when people were looking at DeAndre Swift, they were actually seeing Kamani Vidal, but they didn't know it. And I think Kamani Vidal is a better pass protector, better power runner, better inside runner, better vision, quicker, and just doesn't quite run great routes yet. But Swift doesn't run great routes. He's a check down receiver. You don't see him running Austin Eckler routes. Then there's Dylan Johnson, and as you know, Bloom, we all have our imprints on players that just we're attracted to for good or for bad. And my bad I'm attracted to are either the wide receiver who is just massive trouble, like Michael Westbrook, Josh Gordon, Titus Young. I honestly, if I feel like I'm about to go Brandon Lloyd, if I'm about to go nuts for a receiver, I don't know why, but they should have me scout those guys, and we'll know immediately that they have off-field issues. Because I won't know it. I am drawn to super talented off-field issue guys. If they will kick the defenders behind and also kick your running backs behind, depending on the week, I will probably like them. So then the other guy is the running back who's not fast enough that you're going to like him as a fantasy guy, but it'll probably frustrate all those guys that you drafted ahead of him who were faster but not as skilled, like Spencer Ware. Spencer Ware, Peyton Barber type. Dylan Johnson, for me, is that kind of player. He is not super fast. Could he be Arian Foster or Spencer Ware during a great year? I think so. But at the same time, Mike Leach was like, I'm glad he's gone. He's not very tough, even though he played through some pretty bad injuries this year and played well. Maybe the toughness is that he gets hurt, and he can't help it, as opposed to that he won't play hurt, because he'll play hurt. Catches the ball well, really physical. So there was that. I would say Marvin Harrison was that way. I've been picking Marvin Harrison in Devy leagues without really watching his game closely for the past 3 years. And then when I watched it, I was like, he's absolutely one of the top 3 receivers in this class. But I was like, I don't see generational. Like the way people talk about him, the closest thing I could extrapolate to him on height and weight would be if he had the same speed, if he had the skill after the catch, and if he was more physical. And he's tough. He'd be Josh, the way people are talking about him, he'd be Josh Gordon when Josh Gordon was great. But I see more Mike Williams, T. Higgins plus versions of that, as opposed to like generational talent. I don't see Larry Fitzgerald, and I see Larry Fitzgerald light possibly, which is still great, but it's not that. So that kind of surprised me. And the last one I'll say, I mean, there's many others, but I didn't even know who Ben Sano was.
Ooh.
I didn't even know who he was. And when I watched him, I was like, I really liked him. And then I had him as my tight end too. And then I didn't particularly, then I started like looking at some things again. And I thought, well, maybe I looked at the blocking and I kind of discounted some things, and I brought him down a little bit, and he was down a little bit further in my grades. And what was funny is I asked Chad Ryder about him, and Chad loved him too. And Chad was like, I have him as a top 60 pick. I said, is that what the narrative thinks about it? I don't know. And he goes, I don't care. Yeah. He's like, because Chad's like us. He's like, I don't care. He's like, I don't care. I'm going to put him where I want to put him. I like him. And I was like, let me go back and watch a little bit. And I watched some more, and it helped me learn that I'm going to start probably dividing out blocking responsibilities for tight ends based on whether I think they're a projectable move tight end or an inline tight end, so that I'm not grading it all on the same scale. So guys who are like 255 and under and have move tight end characteristics, I'm going to grade them on a different blocking scale, the way I would maybe like somewhere between running back and tight end. And then for the big boys like Tip Ryman, I'm going to give them the inline responsibilities. And if from that perspective, even though I realized too that I had a couple things I was too low on with him, and when I moved those things back up, he was number 2 on my board. He is like a snowplow in bad weather. But what I like about him is that like when you hit him, he looks like a marshmallow. Like when you're hitting him, it looks like you've hit into a pillow or a heavy bag. Uh-huh. Like try hitting it. You look at a heavy bag and you've never hit a heavy bag before, or it looks like a big pillow. So you think you could smack into that thing, and then you hit your bare hand into that thing like a dummy, and you probably break your wrist. And that's exactly, Ben Sano's like a heavy bag that actually can hurdle people and has like great short area change of direction and speed. And he's a good route runner. And I don't know, man, to me, like I watched him, and what surprised me most was for 3 years, I've been hearing about Michael Mayer, and I was kind of like, yeah, he's okay, but he's not like, he got as much love as Marvin Harrison got for the past 3 years. And then I watched Ben Sano, and I'm like, he should have gotten all the Michael Mayer love.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've anticipated like 4 of my questions in this answer. Because I was going to ask you who's the player that you developed an emotional connection to while you watch them, and you gave us an archetype for the type of players you create emotional connections with while you watch them. I was going to ask you, what are some things that are starting to change about the RSP? And I think you're right on to talk about segmenting out positions. The NFL is doing a really good job segmenting out positions at this point, and it's not just all WR or TE. One thing I want to touch on really quick, and this might be a question that you might say, I don't know. Next question. Your wide receiver rankings are within the range of consensus rankings. There's going to be differences, but they're within the range. Your running back rankings are not. Why do you think they're so? Why do you think like you're kind of in agreement with the general way the wide receivers shake out, but not the running backs?
Because with wide receivers, one of the things that has evolved over the years is that I I really developed my criteria based on coaching, wide receiver coaches who work with these guys in the off season. Drew Lieberman of the Sideline Hustles, a guy I always credit a lot. Jay Norvell, the Colorado State coach who coached Marvin Harrison Sr. and Jay and Wayne and all those guys, and also the Rams crew. I learned a lot about technique and those things from there. So that's probably why. And then from a running back perspective, you could look at it two ways. If you're a Trey Sermon hater, then you will probably say, because I don't know what I'm doing with running backs.
But your jobs are on the line.
Your jobs are on the line. Now, if you're someone who actually has seen the record that I've had with running backs over the years, because I was known as a running back guy probably before I was known as everything else, is that I actually saw running backs as a position that required processing before the NFL did, because the NFL is just discovering, as we heard over the past few years, that the closer you are to the middle of the field, the more you have to process. Well, outside of a center and a quarterback, the running back is no closer to the middle of the field than any other position than those two. So there's a lot to process there. And I think I've always been ahead of the game. And that's why some guys will complain and go, you like those slow guys. And I'm like, no, I like guys who have fast processors. And if they're slow, I go, well, that's besides the point, as long as they're not too slow. And then sometimes they are for a system, like Trey Sermon was too slow for the 49ers system.
Yeah, and I think you could apply that to safeties too. I don't care about the 40 time. I care about the processing, because the 40 time doesn't. I'm like watching Calvin Pryor. I don't care how fast he is. What does he see? What visual information is he getting? How's he reacting to it?
My dog's a strong safety, and he's all those things you just mentioned. He's not very fast, but he's very quick, and he processes very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he already got a bounty for injuring you, right?
He did. He helped me out, though.
Yeah.
He helped me out.
We always love a good Hugo update. Okay. Going back to the players, like I'll just give you a criteria.
Sure.
Let's see who pops into your head. Who was the most frustrating player to watch in the 2024 class?
Most frustrating. Like, just I wanted them to be good and they weren't.
Right. Yeah, you're watching them and you're like, oh, if you just go. Yeah.
I think Braylon Allen. I would say
yes,
because he has the power. He literally got elite power on my score, but he should have Earl Campbell power. Like, he should, maybe not that much, but he should be celebrated for it. But when you turn your hips away from what you're hitting with your pads, you have no power base compared to what you could have. And so there's all, like I said, so fragmented. And it's like, if he can put it all together, he will be a top back in this league. I don't think he's going to put it all together, but even if he puts some of it together, he can still probably be a quality fantasy starter in a good team. But I'll just put it to you this way. It frustrated me because I kept watching him and I go, man, I wonder what Christopher Brooks of Miami, who I loved at BYU and Cal, I wonder what he'd look like in Wisconsin, and that's frustrating.
Yeah, it reminds me when I was in law school, some of the older people, because I started law school right out of undergrad, and there were plenty of people in law school that they met me and they were in their 30s or 40s. They were already coming from the workforce back to law school, had a whole different aura and vibe than all of us fresh face kids, and they're like, oh, what I could do with your brain. And I think of that, you watch Braylon Allen and you watch some other running backs and their approach to being a running back, like what they could do with Braylon Allen's tools,
Yes.
And he's a perfect answer to that. Okay. Who was the most entertaining player to watch?
Oh, wow. There are a lot of entertaining players. Malik Neighbors easily, and we don't have to go too far into him. He's such a good route runner.
Oh yeah.
And most people list all the techniques that players have, but it's the craft in which he applies them that really matter. And he's tough. So he was very entertaining on that level. Jonathan Brooks was really entertaining, the Texas running back.
Yes.
He reminded me of Cadillac Williams and a plus version of Melvin Gordon. Like he knows what he's doing. Blake Corum knows what he's doing. Like those two guys, to me, they're conceptually starter running backs in the NFL. We'll see if the rest can kind of click into place with them. Michael Penix, just watching him throw a ball anywhere to the boundary was super entertaining. There's some giggle-worthy moments with him.
Yeah.
Where you just look and you go, I think I posted one on Twitter where you're like, okay, I'm gonna roll out towards the trash can, and I need you to take a left at the road cone and spin off of the no parking sign, and I'm gonna hit you at the sweeper car.
Right.
I mean, it was like he did stuff like that. That was really a lot of fun. Just watching, Ricky Pearsall would have won the Brandon Lloyd Invitational for aerial artistry on the RSP Island that I told Chris Harris about earlier today. And he goes, you have a very specific imagination about something like this. And I said, coming from a fellow writer like you, right. You should know. He did giggle about that, but he was fun. And then, watching Brock Bowers run away from people, reaccelerate past cornerbacks. I mean, I'm not, I always joke about speed and people overrate it, but to watch a tight end do that, with all the other skills that he has, pretty fun.
Yeah, it is fun. It is really fun to watch these guys. But I do like entertainment, and I think especially this applies to, again, how much time you spend doing this, how much time you spent doing this over the years. Sometimes what's entertaining isn't necessarily highlights or ooh and ah moments, because when you mentioned Corum and Brooks, and this was something I remember when I started watching these guys closely, that I always, it's the kind of thing I think you do a really good job articulating, and I'm not really sure how to articulate it past this word, that you want to watch, you want to see that players are intentional. Yes. That they're intentional about their actions, because there are a lot of players that they're oozing with tools and traits, but they're not intentional, or not consistently intentional, or sometimes it seems like their radio is picking up static. And the players that seem to be intentional, or I used to say, like, the game speaks to them. The game just gives them the instructions. They're just tuned in. And for running back especially, and it's why I think we underestimate, like you said, it's more of a mental position. And of course, part of that's going to be emotional, spiritual, as opposed to a physical position. Remember Chris Henry, not Chris Henry, rest in peace, Chris Henry, but Chris Henry, the running back. And like you said, the NFL maybe is just starting to figure out that all the physical tools in the world, Braylon Allen kind of applies here. And that's, I think, when you watch Corum and Brooks looks like a veteran. Brooks, you could put an NFL uniform on him and you wouldn't tell the difference. He looks like he's been running the ball. He's like a 28-year-old, 5-6 year veteran.
My favorite player in this draft, to be honest with you, just because I'm a running back wonk, and we know that the difference between a bad class at running back and a good one is really one running back plus or minus one guy. So he's the guy to wait on this year for sure.
Yeah, that's your first round pick in. You have like the 8th, 9th, 10th pick. That's who you hope you get, I think. Okay, a couple other things before we go off the rails. It's wild. We've been doing this for a long time. I remember being with you at the 2007 draft when you were taking your RSP around. Oh, really quick. I don't know if you started in 2005. Is Frank Gore the first player to have a junior and senior in the RSP?
No, he wasn't. I started in 2006. So, but Gore was probably the first player I ever wrote a gut check on.
Well, there you go.
Brian Westbrook was the first. So he's honorarily, yes. But don't we have a ton of them now?
It's coming, more and more. But so I was with you at the draft in 2007, and you were taking the RSP around, and fast forward to 2024, you've spawned an industry. I don't even know how many rookie guides there are out there.
Yeah.
Who among the people, or what outfits among the people, other than, of course, the Great Football Guys rookie guide, check that out too. Who do you want to take a chance to take this moment to call out and say, hey, I see your work out there. I see what you're doing. Hey, I like what you're doing.
I'm a big fan of Emory Hunt's work.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always been a big fan of his work because he's not afraid to take stances that he believes in, right or wrong. And he's going to miss wildly on some guys like I have, but he's also going to hit. He's one of those guys. I always joke that if someone calls you an idiot, now my joke is, you're an idiot about this in public. And I go, well, hey, welcome to being the first step to becoming an RSP subscriber for life.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because those types of things happen. You're an idiot for liking Nick Chubb over Saquon Barkley. You're an idiot for liking Patrick Mahomes over Nick Trubisky. Well, you know, Emory Hunt was like Carson Wentz, limited player who needs a supporting cast around him. Not a big fan of him. He got a lot of vitriol for things like that. And he was right. If you ask me, he was right about a lot of players in that regard. So I'm a big fan of what I've seen there. I'm going to say Brandon Angelo doesn't have necessarily a draft guide, but he has a subscription service that I'm checking out. And he does really good work. Angelo Analysis. We do a podcast together, and he is an athletic trainer. He works with pro athletes, former sprinter, who's told a great story about getting whipped by Tyreek Hill, and everybody at that all freshman Big Ten meet was like, "Who is this little runt? We're gonna kill him." And then he was like, "I've never been beaten that bad before in my life." He's a former Purdue running back, so he talks a lot about movement, and he's great about athletic movement and skills, and he's very analytical about how he breaks down film. And I think he does a tremendous job of teaching things that are details that you don't normally see. So those two right off the bat, I think are really worthwhile to mention.
Yeah, and of course, Emory Hunt representing my adopted home of New Orleans, Eleanor McMain, I think. So a lot of, I mean, New Orleans is so underrated as a football hotbed. I know we're in the middle of Across the River, the Kent Babb book about the Edna Carr program, which is, I think, they won 4 straight state championships, which is unbelievable, really, considering what life is like for the kids in that program. Kent Babb, I think, just did the Kim Mulkey profile that got all the attention. Maybe anyway, great sports writer, great writer.
Yeah.
He figured out the sports part, so I love that. I love giving love to New Orleans. So I'll flip the question before we go off the rails. And what about, because I think it must be, I mean, for any number of reasons, you'd be a really fun person to watch football with. But I think part of it is that because you're so deep in this, you right away, well, you have a sorry Joe, like a BS detector. So I'm not going to ask you who is full of it, but I'll ask you, who among the big media NFL analysts do you respect?
Chad Ryder. Ryder right off the bat.
Well,
and I know that he's one of us. I mean, but he's, you know, Chad and I have become good friends, and I think that he's very good at what he does in terms of analytical and film. He's also he's the kind of person that we need more of in this community. He's very encouraging. He's very good at, working with other people. And so that's really great. I would add, I mean, there's so many people that are good on that level. That's
comforting. That's comforting to hear you say that, as opposed to there's a lot of people who it's not a meritocracy and they don't deserve to be there. It sounds like you feel
there's guys that if we're talking about draft media specifically, or just football media,
just when you're just people who are paid to talk about football, paid a lot of money and given a big stage to talk about football, and they actually do a good job of it.
I think Dwayne McFarland. I mean, I'm staying home. I know I'm being a homer for all of you, with the RSP, but Dwayne continues to work on models for players, but he also understands the game. Yeah. And when he first wanted to start at the RSP, I actually talked to someone who had a very high-end analytics background, who I said, will you talk to this guy and make sure I'm not wasting my time? Like, that I'm going to end up, this is not going to, and he said, no, this is Dwayne passes the test. If you want to deal with him, I think you're going to be in good shape with that. I'm drawing a blank, and I feel bad because there are a lot of people out there that I think
Well, I mean,
Devin Jackson, who was the Saints writer for a while,
uh-huh.
he seems up and coming, and I'm like the stuff there. Fran Duffy is great.
Fran,
You
oh,
know, he's maybe not getting the big bucks, but Fran is a good guy.
yeah.
And I think that he does really, really strong film work and great production value work. And he's worthwhile in this space without a shadow of a doubt. And I feel like I'm missing a lot of people. I
Sure.
make fun of Ben Solak all the time,
Ben's fantastic.
but Ben's really good at what he does. And
He's having fun. He's having
he
fun
is.
doing it. That's one of the things that's important
Yeah.
about the way he goes about his work. I love Ben. I can't wait to see where he's going to end up. It's
Yeah.
amazing how quickly he has become an essential NFL take maker, and I enjoy it. Fran just popped up. We were doing when Cecil and I were doing a show recently. I think we're talking about Caleb Williams, and they say, "Oh, in Chicago, what are they going to think of this guy with whatever fingernail polish?" And I said, if he wins, they'll love him and pet him and call him George, like from the old Looney Tunes shout out. And Fran
and
popped
all
up.
those Bears guys will be wearing fingernail
Exactly,
polish in a year.
Exactly. And Fran popped up in my DMs and said that he made him laugh. And I said, I'm like, oh my gosh, Fran, you're listening to our show and you liked what I said. That makes me happy. That makes me Fran Duffy, and just he represents a lot. He's another one like Chad that represents all the good things in our community.
And I don't know if this guy makes a lot of money doing what he does, but he made enough money in the NFL, and that's QB school. Yeah. So JT O'Sullivan at the QB school.
Yeah.
I'm rooting for him to get asked to the dance and turn it down and continue staying at YouTube.
Sure.
That's what I would like to see.
Right on. Okay. Well, we can go off the rails now. Okay, so I'm going to do this is something that we have done dozens of times in the times that we have done shows together, and this is where I'm going to get excited, and you're going to be Matt Waldman, professional wet blanket. Okay, because and this is topical. It's good. It's a long running story here. If you've been listening to the Audible and watching the Audible over the years, because this offseason, as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, as a Western Pennsylvania born and bred Steelers fan, it has felt like a hallucination. Matt Waldman, a wonderful hallucination, a good, the good hallucinations, because this what all I really was asking was maybe a competent 21st century NFL offense. That's all. And we got that with Arthur Smith. And that's plenty. Like just come in, just bring the team, drag them into the 21st century in terms of offensive thinking. We got that. But we weren't done there. Then somehow, because George Payton doesn't know what he's doing, we were able to get Russell Wilson. And I know Russell Wilson's not exactly a franchise. At this point, he's not necessarily going to rescue a franchise, but to get him for the league minimum because of the Broncos' foolishness, that's really exciting. That when you're a Steelers fan, you've been watching Steelers football for the last 3, 4, 5 years. Yes, this version of Russell Wilson is pretty exciting. But then the fact that makes Kenny Pickett say, I want out. Oh, they say don't let the door hit you or God split you, which then creates the opening for Justin Fields. And look, Justin Fields may never turn into the best case scenario Justin Fields, but Justin Fields asked to do what he'll be asked to do in the Steelers offense, which should be highly structured with Arthur Smith. Wow, now I'm even more excited. And then they get Cordero Patterson, one of my favorite players, one of my favorite people in the NFL. So for me, as a Steelers fan, there's hope. There's actually hope. What do you want to do to ruin my fun?
Well, I'd like to have us just switch teams.
Okay.
Well, and then I would have fun because the Steelers, to me, as decision makers, are the anti-Browns, and then which is a good thing for Pittsburgh.
Well, the Browns have the credit card with no limit. See, because if I was going to fun on the Browns, it's the Jerry Jeudy trade, but then they pay him for, I guess, what they think they're going to get out of him. It's a continuation, I think, of Deshaun Watson. But maybe I'll throw it this direction. So where are you at emotionally, psychologically, as a Browns fan at this point?
I'm looking at Ravens hats.
I'm
a closeted Ravens fan, as we all know. I've been that way for a long time. And it's hard. I'm basically Nick Chubb retirement away, because he was the only reason I stayed as a fan when they drafted him. After they drafted Mayfield, I was ready to go. But let's go back to the Steelers real quick.
Sure.
Because listen, Arthur Smith, don't worry about what happened last year in Atlanta. They didn't have a quarterback who could read the field. They ran all these static routes that just break back and sit, because they knew that if the receivers had to break across the field and create, the quarterback couldn't see it well enough to not throw it to the other team. And Arthur Smith ate a lot of the vitriol for his team and took one for the team because of the fact that they couldn't draft a quarterback that was going to be able to do that. So he's a good offensive coordinator, and we saw what he did with the run game in Atlanta. You think the Steelers are going to, the Steelers can run. They're going to be able to run the ball. And they have a trio now, when you add Patterson to that, which means that Harris probably won't have to take as much punishment maybe in certain situations. On top of that, Russell Wilson, listen, I've been having so much fun being able to say, everybody on Twitter joke around and go, my buddy Bloom called Wilson a phony, and now he's going to have to root for this phony, but Wilson, the one thing is, whether you think he's phony or not, he has a deluded belief that he can win any game. And he wasn't as bad in Denver last year as it looked. And he wasn't as bad the year before in the first half of the season until it all fell apart. So you've got a good veteran who's probably chomping at the bit to prove that the Broncos were a dumpster fire. And there's nothing more that I can enjoy more than watch the Broncos be a dumpster fire. I hate that team more than any other team in existence times 10. So for me, to see Wilson have something to prove is great, and he's old enough of a player that I don't think he's going to pull a situation where he doesn't look at Justin Fields and go, "I can help you where I can help you." And Justin Fields gets a year probably to reset, and a lot of players needed a reset. And he wasn't so bad. He needed the Josh Allen plan, if you ask me, pre-draft. He needed some time, and he's going to get a little bit of that. And I think he's going to turn out to be a good quarterback. He's still going to have issues that people get upset about, but so does Josh Allen. Stephon Diggs got traded away, and so we know that he probably wasn't happy with Josh either. He's probably thrilled with CJ Stroud. So I love what the Steelers have done. It just makes me sicker about Cleveland. That's all.
Yeah. Well, Cleveland. They're still going. The AFC North is just an absolute meat grinder.
It's a lovely division.
Meat grinder. Oh, it is. Every single matchup is going to be must see football. Okay. Last question, and then we could do hours and hours on this. We usually talk about jazz. We're talking about music, but not jazz. Real quick. Non-jazz artist. Give me an artist or two that has spoken to your soul over the years.
I like old songwriters like James Taylor and folks like that. Recently, I've been listening to Lake Street Drive, and I kind of enjoy the singer on Lake Street Drive. I like the work that she does, that they do. Who are some other artists that probably fit that description? Aretha Franklin, Al Green, Tower of Power. I like old soul and funk. James Brown. Those are probably ones. Living Color. I like Living Color.
Sure.
I've always been a Living Color fan from back in the 80s. They certainly do that for me. Yeah.
You mentioned James Taylor. I encourage everyone to go up and look up. You all know the song "I've Seen Fire" and "I've Seen Rain," but I don't know if everyone knows what that song is actually about, which to me adds that much more depth. And Aretha Franklin, how do you know Aretha Franklin? if you were she's on the short list. If you said who's the greatest female vocalist, no other qualifiers.
Yeah. She's hot.
That might be the answer. And how do you know? She took one of Otis Redding's songs, and everyone thinks of it as her song.
Yep.
Who's on the short list of greatest male vocalists. And then, I'm down here in New Orleans with, Mahalia Jackson. And you have that great
Yeah.
tradition of like going from gospel into or Irma Thomas, like so many other
Yeah.
great
You
artists.
won't take me off Sarah Vaughan though. I'll just say that. Like
Yeah.
Sarah Vaughan is
Sure.
Sarah Vaughan. I have a crush on Sarah Vaughan. I'll put it to you that way. I know without a shadow of a doubt that I would have probably had a major crush on her back in her heyday. And I loved her from the first time I saw her as an old lady at Piedmont Park in Atlanta for a jazz festival in high school, when somebody tried to film her back in the 80s. And she literally stopped the set and said, "I'll just sit here and not say anything if they don't," and then literally called out the guy and just cursed him out on the stage. And I thought, I like this cantankerous old lady. And then when I heard her sing, I was just like blown away.
Right. Deal sealed. And hopefully, if the deal has not already been sealed to get your RSP, it is now, or at the very least, follow Matt Waldman through the amazing tour, the victory tour of RSP week.
Hopefully, my hair doesn't catch on fire.
Wow, that's a great callback. See, it always comes back to us being old. Yeah, wow.
I'm glad Pepsi's not sponsoring me. Yeah.
That was reported on the radio. I remember listening on the radio like, hey, we've got a special report. We're breaking in to say that Michael Jackson's hair caught on fire. Because we find out much later on that it actually was really serious. It was the biggest star in the world at the time. That's a perfect, wonderful, amazing callback. And it's great to have been around long enough to work together as long as we have and watch the world change. But one thing stays the same. You need your RSP. You got to be part of the Football Guys community. We love you. We do this for you. You're the best. You give us the opportunity to serve you. It's a great privilege. It's a pleasure always, because you're so very classy.